The hero loses his usefulness after defeating the Demon King. Often, they become the next target the king seeks to eliminate. This boy, nailed in midair, is the hero of the Holy Sword, Leonis. After slaying the Demon King, he remained true to his beliefs. He continued to travel the world just as he did in the beginning, hunting down the remnants of demons hiding everywhere. But never in his wildest dreams did he imagine that after a lifetime of fighting to protect humanity, he would be killed by the very people he sought to protect. Your mistake was being more beloved by the people than the king himself. If you had desired status or wealth, perhaps you could have been bribed. Unfortunately, even in death, the hero's body was left exposed in the wilderness. Even the goddess in the heavens could not bear to watch. She had long been disgusted by this ugly world. If nothing changes, then countless more tragic stories like that of the hero will unfold. Thus, the goddess resurrected the hero. She hoped he would stand by her in defying this world. Being a hero is far too dull. Become mine, Leonis. Two years later, the once hero had become the undead Demon King, because the goddess sought to defy the world and establish a new order. Now, the protagonist fights for the goddess. This time, his opponent is formidable. He died twice before turning the tide. It turns out that after the goddess revived him, he became the undead Demon King. Although he gained unparalleled magical abilities, in reality, he was weaker than when he was a hero. After becoming the Demon King, his changed attributes rendered him unable to wield the Holy Sword. To restore his former strength, the goddess transformed the Holy Sword into a demon sword, allowing him to wield it once more. Thus, the protagonist now masters both magic and swordsmanship. On the surface, he appears to be a mage, but the moment he unsheathes the demon sword, he becomes the strongest swordsman. Years passed. The protagonist's appearance completely changed. Over the years, he conquered vast territories, establishing a powerful demon empire. But the goddess had to leave. Her body was fading. She would reincarnate into the world 1,000 years in the future. The goddess hoped he would find her then, but once reincarnated, she might lose herself. So, she made a request of him. If she became a monster in the future, he must use the demon sword to kill her. Seeing his refusal, the goddess had to change her request. If she truly became a monster in the future, he could use the demon sword's guidance to find her true self. After the goddess reincarnated, the protagonist continued expanding his empire. The pressure was immense. One by one, humanity's 6 heroes abandoned their humanity, becoming apostles of the gods. After obtaining immense power, the 6 heroes led the human army in a counterattack. They fought their way to the protagonist's demon capital. One by one, the outer fortresses fell. Many former comrades perished. The protagonist originally intended to face them in battle, but his subordinates stopped him. He still had an unfulfilled 1,000-year promise with the goddess. If he died now, that promise would never be realized. In the end, the Demon King had no choice but to seal himself away. He would awaken 1,000 years later. The search for the reincarnated goddess. The protagonist was once the strongest hero of the Holy Sword. His entire life was spent fighting for humanity. But because his reputation among the people surpassed the king's, he was betrayed and assassinated by the king. The rebellious goddess had been watching over him, and upon his death, she resurrected him as the undead Demon King. Typically, a hero who turns into a Demon King becomes the strongest. But on that day, as he watched the human coalition invade his demon capital, he did not resist. Instead, he sealed himself away in slumber. Because of his promise to the goddess, he needed to travel to the world 1,000 years later, to find the goddess's reincarnation. 1,000 years later, when the celestial star falls to the earth, the child who serves as the vessel of the goddess will appear. Finding this person is my mission, as long as you remember that. Wait a moment, Riselia, find me. The protagonist slept for an unknown length of time, until one day, a girl's voice woke him up. He thought she was a grave robber, and was about to punish her. But then he realized he had returned to a human body, and not just any form, but his exact appearance as a hero. Before he could even process his shock, the girl suddenly hugged him tightly and smothered him unconscious. You're safe now, Big Sis will protect you. Of course, the protagonist couldn't admit that the mighty undead Demon King had fainted from being hugged. So he made an excuse, saying it was hunger from not eating for so long. In that case, this girl was technically his savior. If she hadn't woken him up, he might have actually starved to death in his sleep. The girl's name was Leah. She was a student of the Holy Sword Academy. She had come to this ruin on a mission, and had accidentally saved the protagonist. During their conversation, the protagonist learned the world no longer had magic or combat aura. People could only use the power of the holy sword. But very few were able to awaken a holy sword. While modern humanity's power system had weakened, technology had advanced significantly. Even those who hadn't awakened a holy sword could still fight using high-tech weapons. As they spoke, a void beast suddenly appeared. And it was beyond what Leah could handle. It was the first time the protagonist had seen such a creature. But this was the temple where he had slumbered. How dare it invade this sacred ground? The protagonist was about to annihilate the void beast in an instant. But his oversized clothes made him trip. At that moment, reinforcements arrived and saved them both. Gina, Leah's maid, had already awakened the power of a holy sword. It was the protagonist's first time witnessing a holy sword. It looked similar to an ancient magic artifact. Its power was equivalent to a Tier 4 explosive magic spell. Gina instructed Leah to take the protagonist and leave. She would stay behind to cover them. The protagonist could only think about how much the world had changed. He had never seen a holy sword, nor had he seen a void beast. And now, he had even turned into a child. At that moment, another void beast appeared ahead. It looked even stronger than the previous one, but in the protagonist's eyes, they were nothing more than mere minions. He was about to obliterate the void beast in an instant, but Leah interrupted his magic. Disappear, run now. Don't even think. Leah had only wanted to save him, but she ended up being killed by the void beast. Even in death, she was thinking of the protagonist. She told him to find Gina, as that was his only chance to survive. The protagonist was speechless. These void beasts were nothing to him, he could kill them in an instant. And yet, he had lost an ally. Fine, I'll admit it. I do admire this brave girl, just a little. So your death will not be in vain. Gravity System 8th Tier Magic. Massive Gravity Wave. Perish, you insignificant pests. Yet, after instantly annihilating the void beast, the protagonist realized something. His magic was far weaker than before. It turned out that due to the limitations of his new body. After dealing with the void beast, the protagonist began reviving Leah. Though it was called resurrection magic, in truth, he transformed Leah into an undead vampire queen. But he didn't dare tell Leah the truth. He simply said that her wounds weren't serious, and that a bit of healing magic was enough to restore her. Leah thought it was the power of his holy sword. She was amazed that someone so young had already awakened a holy sword. Once Gina had also finished off the void beast, the two prepared to leave. The protagonist pretended to be homeless and feigned amnesia. Naturally, he was taken in by them. But on the way, Gina showed him just how bold modern girls were. I heard that a bit of stimulation can help cure amnesia. No thanks. Oh, come on. What if Leo turns into a pervy boy? To be honest, boys are naturally pervy. The mighty undead demon king being teased by a little girl speechless. But what happened next shocked him even more. He never expected humans to have built such magnificent fortresses. And there were at least 7 of them, at this scale. Since it was his first time entering a fortress, he had to go through security checks and register an identity card. The process had to be completed alone. Finally, he had a moment to himself. Taking advantage of the solitude, he summoned his most trusted subordinates from his Demon King days, the Shadow Prince, Brax, and the Shadow Assassin, Sherry. It has been a long time, my friend. How may we serve you, my lord? The protagonist was just about to issue orders, when he noticed something strange about Sherry. Back then, when they met, he had already been the Demon King. Sherry had never seen his human form before. Now, upon seeing him for the first time, she instantly fell in love. But when she learned that he planned to enroll in the Holy Sword Academy and not join them, Sherry couldn't help but complain. I thought I'd finally have the chance to take care of my adorable little master. What did you just say? Nothing. I didn't say anything. Reincarnating as a child sure has its perks. Just because he looked like a little kid, the girls let their guard down completely. Not only did they take him into the girls' dormitory, but they even helped him bathe. What's wrong, Leo? At first, Leah really just saw him as a little brother. But suddenly, she felt dizzy. An uncontrollable urge to drink blood. After feeding, she was shocked. She felt as if something had changed in her body. The protagonist no longer hid the truth. She had already died in the temple. It was his magic that turned her into his follower. That was how she was brought back to life. But she was no longer human. She had become the highest-ranking undead, the Vampire Queen. Her earlier dizziness was due to a lack of magic power. From now on, if she ran out of magic, she could drink from him. As her master, it was only natural for him to serve as a walking blood bank. In exchange, he could give her any command, and she would have to obey. But that was a little terrifying. If she had to follow every order, did that include perverted ones too? The protagonist insisted he wasn't that kind of person. After bathing, another problem arose: his accommodation. Since it was a girls' dormitory, it was full of female students. And all the bedrooms were occupied. There was no place for him. But the problem wasn't a lack of space. It was that there were too many places to choose from. Every girl wanted him to stay in her room. They were all so enthusiastic. Rejecting any of them would feel awkward. Who could understand such troubles? Want to stay in my room? You can eat my homemade sweets every day. My room is fine too. I'm rarely in my room, so you can use it as you like. You can stay in mine too. I can even tutor you. And no way. Big sis. I think Leo should stay in my room. In the end, the protagonist chose to stay with Leah. After all, they both had secrets to keep. It was safer for them to stay together. That night, the Shadow Wolf delivered intelligence. It had discovered a massive magic crystal beneath the city. The stored magic within it was enough to power the entire city. The protagonist was impressed by this technology. He considered taking it for his Demon King's army. Meanwhile, the maid had also gathered intelligence. For example, she learned that this food called donuts was delicious. The hole in the middle was designed for even heating. The protagonist took a bite. It was indeed sweet. Besides that, she also bought cream puffs, ice cream, and other delicacies that didn't exist 1,000 years ago. The protagonist was annoyed. I told you to gather intelligence, not just eat. Of course not. The maid also discovered no one in this city knew anything about the Demon King or the war from 1,000 years ago. It was as if someone had deliberately erased that history. The sound of running water in the bath caught the maid's attention. She was very curious about the protagonist making Leah his follower, because this meant Leah had taken some of her master's favor away. Are you upset about something? I just don't understand how the Demon King could be such an idiot. Hey, I can hear you. This maid had always been strange. Getting angry at random moments was one thing, but she had never respected him as her master. Leah finished bathing and stepped out. Speaking of which, this follower had a problem too. She treated him like a child. She never kept her guard up around him. She walked around in revealing clothes every day, which made things awkward for him. And as the highest-ranking vampire queen, Leah wasn't even utilizing her full potential. The protagonist intended to train her into one of his strongest warriors. The modern training facilities looked advanced. All the data was neatly displayed, but it lacked a true battlefield atmosphere. So the protagonist set up a magic barrier, then summoned an army of undead soldiers. Now Leah could experience real combat. The boy woke up and found bite marks on him. He questioned the girl. Why do you always drink my blood when I'm asleep? The girl blushed. She knew it was wrong. Yet every midnight, she couldn't resist the urge. The boy understood this well. After all, a vampire queen was naturally nocturnal. It was normal for her to struggle with her bloodthirst at night. As her master, it was actually his duty to provide her with blood. Although it seemed like he was scolding her, he simply wanted her to at least ask first, before drinking his blood. Though they called themselves master and servant, they acted more like a couple. They often went out for casual strolls. One day, Sherry happened to see them. The little maid instantly felt jealous. She worked herself to the bone, taking on jobs just to buy him sweets. Yet, he was completely indulging his new follower. He pampered her like a princess, even carrying things for her. Hiding in the shadows, she watched them leave. Curious, she wondered where they were going. Unable to resist, she secretly followed them. Leah had taken the protagonist to an orphanage restaurant. It was both a restaurant and an orphanage. The owner used the restaurant's income to support the orphans. Leah, technically an orphan herself, often worked there to help take care of the children. This resonated with the protagonist. He, too, had been an orphan in his past life. But he never had such a warm home. However, these kids were quite mischievous. In the blink of an eye, a boy had flipped up Leah's skirt. The protagonist barely held back from blasting him with magic. But after all, they were just children. And since Leah herself wasn't bothered, he let it go. During dinner, the same boy chattered loudly while eating. He sprayed food and saliva all over the protagonist's face. Enraged, he almost slapped the kid. Luckily, there were well-behaved children too. A little girl kindly offered him a handkerchief. Now, this kid was nice, though she blushed whenever he spoke to her. But they couldn't even eat in peace. A massive plant had invaded the city's energy core. As it took control of the magic reactor, a wormhole opened in the sky. Countless void beasts poured into the city. The massive city switched into fortress mode to defend itself. Though the main magic reactor was taken, Each section had its own backup energy source.